Have you enjoyed it? Of course, you're not going to say no. No, we hated it, Pastor. I don't know why I ask questions like that. Anyway, our spiritual practice this week is our everyday use of food. We all use it, right? Anyone not using food this week? I didn't think so. Well, how is food a spiritual practice? You may be asking yourself. How does food, what does it have to do with worship? I have a video that I'm asking Jeff to play that I think will enlighten us all.
Our motto at Southside Abbey is no leftovers. We need that in terms of food and people, because we use the dinner church model, and and so there's a meal incorporated into our worship every week. We worship in a borrowed space. We have a good. Yeah. Thanks for that. So I've been reading this guy, and I don't even know if the guy's Episcopalian or what, but his stuff ended up in the. Yeah, that's right. His stuff ended up in the most unfortunately named treatise, Liturgical Studies 4. Doesn't that sound like a book you want to just like run out and read? But his name is Matthew Oleska. I think Matthew Oleska, and he works in Alaska. And so in Alaska, you've got First Nations folks and you've got Russian Orthodox folks. So I think he's borrowing from both for this. But this whole idea of the idea of bread being more than just the product of like a manufacturing process. Like to have bread, you need actually like the whole universe, because you have to have the sun and you have to have the earth, and the earth has to rotate and orbit the sun, and there's got to be wind, and there's got to be rain, and there's got to be night, and there's got to be day, and all this stuff has to happen for even wheat to grow. And then when the wheat grows, like we have to interact with it in appropriate ways. Tending the field, we gotta sight the wheat, and then something about that wheat has to die. There's a death there so that it can be reborn as bread. The grain can be ground into flour. We put leaven in the dough. There's your biblical imagery right there. And so that all of this happens, and if it's baked to the appropriate temperature, like a miracle happens, and we see this resurrection of wheat into bread. And the beauty of, we think about wheat as many grains on a hill that all get sort of merged together to become this one bread. And so, what we're really about is, at Southside Abbey, is lifting up the greater reality that this bread, this communion bread, is holy because all bread is holy. Show me bread that's not full of the presence of God. That's a tough proposition. So, Wonder Bread would probably qualify. It's like, are they just using a syringe to make bread at that point? But if it's real bread and there's love in it, and we've got a great relationship with a local artisan bakery he loves, and they make the bread for us, and they put love in the bread, man. So that's what I think food has to do with worship. It's opening our eyes to the possibility that God is not only in food all around us. The presence of God is not only in food all around us, but also in everything all around
us. Amen. And no disparaging comments about Wonder Bread. That Wonder Bread is wonderful if that's your bread of choice. I want to get a letter about that this week. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart, Lord God, be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Some of you have heard me talk about my great aunt Leola, but she was gotta keep up with this, my mother's father's brother's wife. You there? Her name was Leola Johnson Faber. I think she must have somehow been related to my husband's family, although she was from Canada and his folk were from the South. But I think she was my mother's favorite aunt as well. Everyone has a favorite aunt, I think. But she was funny and playful, and she was a little mischievous. She always had a twinkle in her eye and kind of this sly little smile on her lips. I remember my mother telling the story, I hope I haven't shared this with you before, but when she was a young girl, my mother had long, just super white blonde hair, and her parents were quite strict, and she was allowed to have very long straight hair. No curling it, no dyeing it, no perming it. And one week my grandparents had gone away and my mother was staying with my Aunt Leola. And at that time, I don't know if any of you remember this, but it was all the fad to dye your hair with Kool-Aid. I think then they had 3 flavors, right?
Yeah.
Cherry, grape, and orange. And so my Aunt Leola helped my mother dye her beautiful white blonde hair orange. Now my mother was quite popular as a result, popular at school, but not too popular with home. But Aunt Leola was always game for something new, something fun, something different. She was a bit daring, small little woman too, right? Well, my great Aunt Leola loved dessert. She always left room for dessert. And I don't care if we were out to lunch or out to dinner, she always ordered dessert. I loved going to lunch and dinner with her. Even at home, she would have a pie or a cake, something that she would pull out and share with us when the meal was over. And when she passed away, we of course all gathered to remember her, and a group of us went out to dinner the night of her funeral. And we went to probably the only fine dining restaurant in Central Point, Oregon, population 2,000. The fact that they even had fine dining really was remarkable. But the place was called Mon Désir. Doesn't that just sound Mon Désir? That was their favorite. My parents, my grandparents and my great aunts and uncles, that was their favorite place. And that night we had a wonderful meal and we laughed and we told stories and just shared all of the wonderful memories that we had about her. And at the end of the meal, we ordered one of every dessert on the menu. There were 9 desserts. Coincidentally, there were 9 of us. And so we each received a dessert and we would take a bite and then we would pass it. And it went around 2 or 3 times as we enjoyed dessert in honor of Aunt Leola. Leave room for dessert, right? And you see, I love dessert too, you can probably tell. And leaving room for dessert reminds us not to be excessive in our eating, right? But to always leave a little room. And this idea of leaving room or having some left reminds me of this practice of gleaning. Our biblical lesson this morning from Leviticus we are reminded, of the early teaching to leave some of the crops on the edge of the field unharvested, to leave some for the poor and the hungry so that they could receive the food that they needed for their own survival. Whether it was the grain fields or the grapes in the vineyard or whatever crop that was being grown, the message was the same. The direction was clear. Leave some for those in need. I hope everything's okay. Prayers for our firefighters, our EMS, and whoever's home they're going to. Amen. Oh, I just got a chill. I think the most popular story of gleaning, most of you probably recognize this story, the story of Ruth and Naomi. When Naomi returned to Bethlehem, her daughter-in-law Ruth had gone with her, and the 2 widows survived by gleaning the fields and receiving food, and then also the excess they were able to sell to provide for their other needs. And in this story of gleaning, it led to an introduction and an eventual wedding when Ruth met and married Boaz. That we'll save for another day. But do you know that gleaning still occurs today? I didn't really think about it much until I was researching and writing this sermon, but it is just simply the means of getting what's left over, right, to the folks who need it. Have you ever wondered what happens to the tomatoes that maybe are not quite perfect, those that are too big or too small, or maybe they're just not the right shade of red, or the oranges maybe that have a big blemish on them, or an apple. Next time you go to the grocery store, I want you to notice and pay attention to the uniformity of our produce. Now, they don't all grow exactly the same size, right? Some are left in the field too ugly to bring to market. And these perfect, imperfect, misfit produce used to be thrown out, or at least until folks realized that there was a need for this food. It's estimated that more than 100 billion pounds of food is thrown away in our country every year. 100 billion pounds of food is thrown away in our country this and every year. And at the same time, we have 49 million people who are hungry. 16 million of those are children who are at risk of not having a meal. In Las Vegas, an organization called 3 Square gleans food from the restaurants and from the grocery stores, receiving perishable items that are just close to their expiration date. 3 Square estimates that an average of 12.8 people in Clark County are what they call food insecure. They're not sure where that next meal will come from. And I think you will find this shocking that Boulder City has a higher than average number of people who are food insecure. That surprised me. 14.3% of our population, approximately 2,200 people here in Boulder City, aren't sure where their next meal will come from. And our scripture tells us that we are to treat one another justly, not just to provide food to the needy, but we're not to steal or to lie. We're not to deceit or defraud our neighbors. We're to treat everyone with dignity and respect. And we're not to treat those poor in our society any differently than we would choose to treat someone who was quite wealthy. You see, we're called to be fair. We're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. This is the Lord's commandment. Our scripture reminded me of John Wesley's 3 simple rules that were adopted by John Wesley when he began this Methodist movement, and they are rules that we follow today, and I know many of you know these. Do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. It's pretty simple. That's why they call them simple rules. And these are the 3 rules that when we follow, everything else will fall into place. Now, I want to digress just a moment. Stick a pin in that, right? Follow me over here. You with me? The special general conference of our United Methodist Church is meeting now. They met yesterday for 6 hours in prayer and preparation to begin the business today following their morning worship, which started at 8:30 this morning. There are 864 delegates representing United Methodist churches from all over the world. 58% of them are from the United States, 30% from Africa. The rest are from the Philippines, Europe, and Eurasia. And we will not know what is decided about the future of our church until legislation is brought forward, and there's 78 pieces of legislation, and each one to be discussed and voted upon. Our bishops, our Council of Bishops, recommended the One Church plan, and that is the one that I support, and I believe most of our congregation supports. It allows us to continue to be the open and welcoming church that we are. And I ask that you continue to pray for God's Spirit to guide our delegates, because this is a time of intense discernment and decision-making. It is possible that come Tuesday, when it closes, that our United Methodist Church will look nothing like the church that we have come to know and love. And that's a frightening thing for me. because I've dedicated my life to this church. I do have hope, and I do know that we should be encouraged, because no matter what happens, we know a couple things, right? We know God still loves us. And we know we still love God. And I don't think that Jesus really cares what the name of our church is, right? Or what we call ourselves, or what church we're affiliated with. I think Jesus cares about whether or not we love God, and whether we love our neighbors as ourselves. That brings us back to our scripture. Take the pin out. Right? And to Wesley's 3 simple rules: do no harm, do good, stay in love with God. Whether we're practicing these rules in our global community or inside our church on Sunday morning, we represent Christ when we follow Jesus' teachings. And Jesus wants us to consider the needs of others. He wants us to do good, right? He wants us to share what we have, not to hoard for our own wealth or for our own selfish benefits. Jesus wants us to share our resources with those who have less than we do. And we are to love our neighbors, our black and our brown neighbors, our rich neighbors, our poor neighbors, our immigrant neighbors, our queer neighbors, our young and our old neighbors. We are to love those who are unlovable, as well as those who just delight the pants off of you. Because you see, as United Methodists, we do no harm. And demonstrating love for our sisters and brothers means that we will go out of our way to bring hope and reassurance, to offer a helping hand, to surround a sister who is in need, to welcome all and to be there for one another, to be Christ in very practical ways. And one practical way that we're asked to do that this week is through our spiritual practice of food. We can share our own gleaning with others. We can reduce our own excess and avoid throwing away food that we don't use. To overcome our spiritual affective disorder means that we must think of others first, not just ourselves, and we must leave room for dessert. Your assignment this week, you're gonna be glad after next week, right? No more assignments. I might just keep this up. I kind of like it. So your assignment, dear ones, take a break from the extras or the vices that you indulge on a daily basis. What are some of those things, quickly? Anyone?
Chocolate chips.
Chocolate chips, yes.
Candy.
Dessert.
Candy.
Candy. Starbucks.
Diet Coke.
Diet Coke. All right, so you know what I'm talking about. So remove some of these extras from your surrounding. A favorite treat, take a break from social media, and then spend time praying for our general conference. By the way, if you want to follow along, umc.org, they're doing live streaming, or you can go and see the news of the day if you don't want to sit riveted in front of your computer screen. Totally understand that. But do check at the end of the day to see what was accomplished during the day. Then go to your closet, glean your closet, household items, kitchen, bathroom, library, games, toys, etc. And I would encourage you to donate them to Experience Merchandise here in town, which supports Christian Center's preschool program. And then save room for dessert. This is your last one. Number 4, enjoy a piece of pie or a dessert, whatever it is that makes you smile, and continue in your other